South Africa has got at least 4.5 trillion problems, and one of them has been the passing of the budget recently. You will notice that in the corner of the screen we've got the debt clock. That is the money that South Africa owes. We pay more than R1 billion a day in interest alone. That's without paying back any of the capital. And joining me today is possibly one of the most important men in South Africa right now. And that is the leader of Rise Mzansi, Songezo Zibi. Songezo, well done. Welcome back. Why I call you one of the most important people in South Africa is for two reasons. One is that you head up SCOPA, the Committee on Public Accounts. You're the guy who sort of sits there and goes through the pluses and the minuses. You're like the chief accountant almost. And then another reason that you're important is that you voted with the motion to pass the framework, the budget framework, which has been so controversial recently, which turned from a budget issue into a political theatre show, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to discuss that because that's been discussed to death. We've had Musi Maimane here saying he would never vote for a VAT increase, and he voted 3 days later. We had Michael Beaumont here telling all kinds of things, as Michael does, and usually no sentence ends without the DA, because they supported the framework. You have supported the framework, and why I'm interested to get your view, and I'm not attacking you like I would attack those, is because you're on the inside.
Yes.
You're very much the man looking at the books right now. And from an informed perspective, why have you voted in favor of this framework, even though it's going to result in an increase in VAT, which is very unpopular, plus bracket creep, which means that we all pay more in PAYE, if you're lucky enough to get an increase. So that's a big if. Because it's only public servants that get increases. But why did you vote in favor of this framework?
So, Mike, firstly, thanks very much. It's really great to be back. And the reason we voted for the framework is because, for two reasons. Why we understood what the purpose of the framework is. And that is, do you agree with the debt limit or not? Do you want us to borrow more? And I see on the screen there is 4.56 trillion and a bit. Next week, that number will have grown significantly. Parliament voted that we don't need to borrow more. We then considered whether the size of the budget need to be reduced or not. And Parliament said, keep the budget where it is, which left only one question on the table. Where are you going to get the money? Right. We're not going to borrow it. And we also don't want to spend less, right? Okay, which leaves you only with the revenue measures proposed by the finance minister. However, because we believe there is room to move money around, that's a factor of the appropriations process, which begins now. It's in play. The DA, for instance, on the 1st of April already made, or 2nd of April, already made its submissions in that respect. That's how the calendar of Parliament works. The VAT amount is 13 billion rand. We are going to find that 13 billion rand somewhere and plug that hole. But it's how the process works. The second reason and last reason we voted for, third and last reason why we voted for the framework is because one of the things we need to move on to is to give SARS that damn money they need to collect that 800 billion they've identified. Even if they collect 5% of it, it would be 40 billion. It would cover both the personal income tax and the VAT. Now you have a chicken and egg situation where we want SARS to collect the money, but we don't want to graduate to the stage where we can release the money to SARS and so on. And my leadership is about choices. Sometimes you get proven wrong later on. Sometimes you get proven right. We believe we've got an opportunity now during the appropriations process to do the shifts. I need to say, it may mean that the VAT kicks in for a while from May. And I think we shouldn't mislead South Africans and say it's impossible for that to happen. It may happen. because of the calendar of Parliament and how it works. What we want is, in the event that happens, that's as short-lived as possible.
Right. So now let's go back to the framework, and I want to pick up on two of the points that you have raised. One is that you will find the shortfalls, because let's be fair, I think that my dog Waldo could find those shortfalls, because we've got such a bloated structure, such corrupt practices, etc., etc. We hear from the Auditor General every time she opens her mouth about billions and billions of rands worth of wastage. So to find that 13 billion now, or 80 billion as it was in his first budget, is not difficult. But I want to raise two issues. One is that we had our resident scientist, Professor Fikile Mbalula, saying that the ANC will not cut. We will not cut expenditure, right? So good luck in finding any money from, And then we've had a situation where in that process, in the build-up to what was meant to be the first budget speech, all the way to now, the ANC refused to even entertain any discussion from its GNU partners. So what informs your decision that suddenly the same ANC, they wouldn't talk to its partners, will suddenly hear you on finding revenue, and then we will perhaps reverse the VAT increase?
So, Mike, the ANC does not have the numbers to pass a single resolution in Parliament. The committee members have 11. Committees have 11 members. The ANC has 4.
Yeah.
So they might believe that they're in a position to refuse things. They're not. So that's the first thing I want to say. So it's not up to Fikile Mbalula or anyone in the ANC to say we refuse to cut, because they simply don't have the numbers, which is why it's important for them to talk to other partners. The second thing is, I want to say we must differentiate between the relationship between the ANC and the DA and the relationship between the ANC and other political parties. I have literally untrammeled access to the finance minister. I can see him if I ask to see him. I can talk to him on the phone if I want to talk to him on the phone. We meet in person, we speak on the phone, and so on. And it is not true that they don't listen. At least we haven't had that problem. The second thing, that they don't consider proposals we've placed on the table. When we said initially that the VAT problem is bigger than all of us, and we can't countenance it at the time at 2 percentage points VAT, the finance minister dropped it to 0.5%. The problem is the money is then being taken from personal income taxes, which led to some of us raising a new issue, which is personal income tax. And there are discussions taking place today, there are discussions taking place on Friday, and that kind of thing. And I've just set out this process that we have, because they know very well, if they can't get consensus from 6 members of a committee, from an additional 2 parties, or 2 parties in the committee, whatever they want won't even reach the National Assembly. The DA's problem is that they only speak to the ANC and no one else.
Okay, but what informs your statement that they will listen? Once again, I'm going to revert back to my yardstick here, which is Waldo, my Labrador. He also listens.
Let's send Waldo to Parliament.
Yeah, let's send him to Parliament. It couldn't be worse. But he does listen, but he doesn't always do what I want him to do. Now, I'm saying that, the ANC have become very good, and we see it in some of their speeches where they talk from the heart. They say how much they care and how much they want the country to grow, and unemployment really pains them. And then they go and waste more money. I'm saying that listen doesn't pay the rent.
No, Mike. By the way, it's not just listening. So the discussion for us about the budget, by the way, began with expenditure. Right. We placed a shopping list on the table. I won't go through it. Place a shopping list on the table. Said, listen, if this GNU thing is going to work for us, we've got to be able to go back to the people that voted for us and say the things that we campaigned on are being given proper attention. And I think I've said it on this show and elsewhere. Whatever is not funded is not important. It's just talk. Right. That's where everybody begins. That's where we began. And we've seen more than half of the things that we wanted being accommodated in the budget. There are things that are not in there, like sports facilities for schools, additional money for Transnet, etc., etc. It's not there. It's not in the budget. We're not happy about it, but there are things that we got in the budget. We have to be careful about walking away from the discussion about where the money is going to come from and not want to talk about the borrowing and the size of the budget as well, because you can't have one conversation. So that is the one thing. The second thing is I've actually had the conversation with the finance minister about waste, to the extent that his office has sent me very detailed information about areas where the government is wasting money. He has also agreed to appear before the Standing Committee on Public Accounts to provide more context and color and information on where the government is wasting money, so that we can do something about it. Also agreed to that, and I've said it many times. The point, Mike, being that we must also be careful of giving the public the impression that all of these things that need to be done can be done at the stroke of a pen. Where I agree with you is that the relationship between the ANC and the DA is a mess. And that relationship is affecting the sentiment and functioning of the entire government. But let's be clear. That part of the polygamous marriage between them is the problem. I don't have a problem getting some of the things that I asked the finance minister to do, and I've just listed them.
It most certainly is part of the problem, or maybe the problem, but at least it's getting us to this point where we're having proper discussions. If the GNU worked the way the ANC wanted it to work, they would have wanted the DA just to sign off on anything that the ANC put down, right? So it was their objection that got us here.
Well, Mike, I don't want to talk on behalf of the DA or the ANC. Can I share my observation?
Please.
That's all I can do.
That's fair
right?
enough.
I think in the relationship, the relationship suffers from some defects on both sides, right? There are instances where I think the ANC forgets it doesn't have a majority anymore.
Yes.
And we have to remind it, right? There are also people in the ANC who have never liked the idea of working with the Democratic Alliance. Mm-hmm. And they're constantly working to undermine its presence in the GNU. But I also know that the DA has similar challenges internally, right? So it cuts both ways. Yeah, people are upset that they didn't get cabinet roles on both sides, etc., etc., etc. But also silly ideological issues, in my view. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, Mike, the DA to the Democratic Alliance, none of the political parties in the GNU exist for the purposes of advancing policy. As it happens, for instance, expenditure reviews, Mike, I agree with the DA. Do you think they've ever spoken to me about it as chairperson of SCOPA? No. Right? Shouldn't they speak to me so that when we have the conversation, John can say, Mr. President, it's not just me. Yes, the chairperson of SCOPA here sitting next to me, he also agrees, right? But they don't talk to me because I don't exist. And every chance they get, they attack us. At least Helen does. John doesn't. Helen does, right? So there's also this problem where you are in a big arrangement. You don't want to build a coalition that you may need to force the ANC to concede on things. You just insult the other parties at every turn. You can't do that. The last thing I want to say, Mike, is that, interpersonal relationships matter. During the election, we went at each other with John. We haven't done it since the election. That was an election. I don't hate John. You know what I mean? We must now work to build the country. He's working hard as Minister of Agriculture, and anywhere where I can help John, I will help him. It doesn't help to have one of your colleagues to keep insulting the people you're supposed to work with. You know what I mean? It builds resentment, and it causes those who want to undermine the whole arrangement to keep saying, I told you.
Yeah.
That's my comment, Mike. You
Yeah.
know,
No,
I don't know how much else I can say.
No, and you know, to close that off, I'll give you my own perspective. You know, this is exactly the same comment that came out of some of these big metros that were run by coalitions and you know, coalition partners when these were DA-led coalitions in Tshwane, Johannesburg, Kuruleni, were saying they just don't listen to us. So, you know, there's definitely a problem there. If only the DA would come onto the State of the Nation and give us their side of the story, but they don't do it. The only answer I get, which is a very unsatisfactory one, I've got it a few times, from Helen Zille herself saying, well, if the voters don't want to give us a majority, then they must get, and I must admit, I roll my eyes because why should, you know, let's punish the victim. Okay, so anyway. Let's move forward. I want to pick up on something else,
yes,
you know, pertaining to the whole budget discussion and your work at Scopa. I'm very, very concerned. I'm very concerned that there's a thing that's crept into South Africa where a lot of people hold the public purse hostage by saying, we can't do our jobs unless we get more money. Okay, now this is Edward Kieswetter's latest trick, right? He's saying there's 800 billion rand out there that we would get if only we had more money. Now, I don't know where this 800 billion rand is because one would see it. If it's taken out of the current economy, that's going to hurt more than him collecting the money, right? That's one thing. Why can't he do it with what he's doing? Because we hear the same thing from the NPA. We can't do our jobs. We can't convict anybody. We can't prosecute anybody because we need more money. You give them more money, they still don't prosecute. They say, no, we need more money. And all of these government bodies need more money in order to do their jobs. Now, you know, I would imagine that, you know, I'm not 100% sure that I understand what Mr. Kieswetter is saying.
I do.
Please explain.
So you know, Mike, so the 800 billion is not in extra taxes. It's taxes they've failed to collect.
From whom?
From a non-compliant people, not you and I, Mike. You and I have nothing to worry about. Believe me.
Speak for yourself.
Not everyone. Not everyone is as you know what is as.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example,
please.
Right. So
taxes.
And I don't want to. I also don't want to compromise the work they've got to do.
Sure.
But there is blockchain technology and crypto now.
Right.
Right. A lot of people are just using crypto to avoid detection. Right. You and I aren't. We're using the banking system, do our invoices and so on, add VAT and that kind of thing. There's a lot of people who don't, right? And SARS just doesn't have the technology to surveil and bring that money in, right? Which means you and I, Mike, are subsidizing the people who are not paying their fair share. And we need to give SARS. So that's one area. That's one area. I know that they have to, and I know other state agencies that work in the same. I don't want to get into too much detail, that have added up capacity. If you have to look at their IT budgets, they've grown because they need to be able to improve the surveillance of fiscal leakage, basically, right? So it's not additional taxes. It's basically saying we have people who are still working with faxes and things. We need to be working with different technologies now. Let's invest in the money. Let's pay them competitive salaries and so on. That's one thing. The second area is actually the area of existing sin taxes, which don't need to be increased. In fact, in Parliament, I said to the minister, part of what we do is to create a perverse incentive. The higher the sin taxes, the more you incentivize people to evade them and make lots of money while evading the sin taxes. So there's the area of just the excise environment.
Yeah,
right?
then Julius Malema is going to come after you, isn't he?
No comment.
Because I presume we're talking about things like illicit cigarettes, which is known to the world.
But Mike, so let me put it to you this way. If I was still in business and I was investing 7 billion to collect 800 billion, that's less than 10% of what we need. If our revenue service, Mike, does not move on with the times, we are just going to keep increasing taxes and reducing the efficiency of collecting them. So the SARS case, Mike, please, I don't want to fight about it. We can fight about all of these
No,
other
we'll
SOCs.
fight about it. It's
but
just that
SARS need to get the money. Otherwise, Mike, we're going to keep taxing South Africans more when we shouldn't.
I'm with you on that. But it was just that originally when he made the statement the day before what was meant to be the first budget speech, it was 100 billion. Suddenly it gets to this fantastical number of 800 billion. And who's going to say no to it? So the next thing, the guy's going to get his money. And then he's going to say, oh, well, it turns out everybody, sorry.
Just 300 after all.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I'm just saying, you know, for example, we've seen no improvement in the NPA, despite Shamila Batoy she hasn't put anybody behind bars and she's claimed more money all the time. And you would have thought less money, okay, then only prosecute 20 out of your 200, but at least prosecute 20. So, this has become a trick, the way I see it.
No, I mean, for SARS, honestly, it is not a trick, Mike. I have had detailed discussions about where the money is for, and I believe it is justified. What we need to hold SARS accountable to is the actual collection, right? Mm-hmm. Even if we collected 300 billion, listen, rather than taxing South Africans to get that money extra, I mean, we shouldn't have any more taxes.
Yeah, okay.
We must just collect the tax we're not collecting.
Okay, well, yeah. Okay, so now let's talk about it. And you explained it off air very, very well, that there's basically 3 legs to this big pot. One is debt, which there's a certain natural amount of debt. And I refer you to our friend here, the debt clock, which means that we've got limited room to finance our dalliances with more debt. Then we've got expenditure, which you think that you can cut back on. Fikile and Balula says no. The unions say pay more. You guys are giving above inflation increases in an economy that isn't growing to public servants. So I'm not sure. You say that you're going to find money in expenditure. Not sure how that happens because it never happens. And then there's more revenue. Right, one is Edward Kiswet's wet dream of getting money somewhere that he can see but he can't get to.
Give the guy a chance. Give the guy a chance. He exceeded his target.
Yeah, everybody's sort of saying, you're kind of saying, like, give the Minister of Finance a chance, like he just got there. He's been there for years. And his party's been in charge for 31 years. And Edward Kiswet didn't just get there today. So I'm just saying the timing is suspicious. But let's talk about where we are in the economy and raising revenue.
Yeah.
Now, we talk about raising revenue. Yes, we've got a cost problem, but we've got no economic growth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I haven't heard one party talk about, I always mention it because I have to mention it again. He may or may not exist. There's a man by the name of Sipho Nkosi. Don't know if you know the guy. He was appointed as the red tape cutter.
Oh, no, we know each other.
Then he lost his scissors or something, and he cut 0 red tape since 2017 when he was appointed as the red tape cutter. I do business. It's impossible to do business. Because the red tape, you can go to every office park and every office block. You're going to find offices empty, right? What do you suggest we do in order to increase revenue by growing our economy? We keep on hearing entrepreneurs are the way to get employment, but I don't hear anybody addressing the problem.
No, except Rise Mzansi. So Mike, there are certain problems that are choking the economy. The one is transport and logistics, right? I've spoken to farmers. I've been as far as Limpopo, speaking to farmers who farm strawberries, beef, etc., who sell stuff here and overseas. The transport infrastructure squeezes their margins. It's worse now because of the problems that Transnet has in the ports and that kind of thing. They have to fly stuff in, it costs more and so on. So they keep really getting strangled. So we've got to solve that problem. It's part of that expenditure environment I spoke about that nobody wants to talk about. But it's not just Transnet. The amount of money that fleet owners pay to fix, their delivery vans and trucks because the roads are in the state that I don't need to give you a
I live in this country.
Right. Yeah. So you know it, right? So logistics chokes the economy. Then energy chokes the economy and the country fiscally. Do you know in this whole tax discussion that we're having, Mike, part of the revenue leakage, by the way, is the diesel rebate industrial users get because of load shedding. And you know one of the entities that also gets billions in diesel rebates because it uses lots of diesel is Eskom itself. So fixing Eskom, liberalizing the energy market, and working towards cleaner and cheaper or more competitive energy over time is going to help businesses, Mike. We can't avoid it. So that's the second part. The third part, Mike, is the disintegration of local government. It's incredibly, this is an enterprise. It's incredibly hard to subsidize Data Morero's failures here, Mike. You have to dig into your pocket in order to subsidize those failures. These three things are choking the economy. There's the corruption and the red tape, but these are the three big problems, right, that are choking the economy. And I feel that however we try and tinker around the edges, unless we resolve these things, we're always going to, at the enterprise and operational level, we're going to have a problem. Lastly, when I worked in mining, energy cost was 11% of inputs. It's closer to 21, 22%. It's doubled. The inability to rail transport ore and other produce to port costs money, which the producers have to pay. So there are structural problems, Mike, some of which are actually provided for in this budget, but we will never get there because South Africa is also parochial in its nature in what we talk about. The local government problem is a particularly important one. I tell people, because I get inundated with complaints as chairperson of Scopa, we have a political problem, Mike. The reality is that the ANC, where it governs, has collapsed local government. Short version. This is an electoral problem. This is an electoral problem, Mike. And I don't know how we get out of it short of, again, trying to persuade voters that don't make the same mistake again, please. This is killing us. Tswane is beginning to be on the up, right? And that's a good thing, I think. Joburg, not. You get what I mean? So I'm saying, Mike, I know there are all of these things, but I like to distill things to the biggest problems that we face. And if we can't solve these problems, if the GNU cannot focus on those things, as well as cutting the waste, taking that money, putting it back into the economy, putting it into service delivery, we're always going to be a 0.8% growth economy that pays too much for social grants.
Yeah. Let's talk about social grants. You've got a strong opinion on social grants.
Yeah. Social grants, the extent of the social grants that we have. So, firstly, the idea of looking after people who are vulnerable and don't have the means to look after themselves, I am 100% behind. I'm a social democrat. So I believe in the nanny state, as it were. But the nanny state has limits. For example, the COVID relief grant was supposed to be temporary. We still have it in place because we are failing to grow the economy. Those people should be able to get jobs and work and earn a living wage, not 350, and support their families. So we must work deliberately towards reducing the number who are dependent on the state for their survival. And the only way you do that is by growing the economy. One of the suggestions we've placed on the table is, let us back ourselves as a country. Let us have proper governance measures in place and say, at a certain point, we will cancel the COVID relief grant, have a 25 billion rand a year intervention that improves people's skills, supports people to start enterprises and sustain them meaningfully and so on. Anybody with a real potential to hire 5 or more people, we're going to have focus programs to help them to succeed. Because you then move those people to being income earners rather than grant recipients. But in South Africa, we are afraid, Mike, of making these big moves. And so we paralyze ourselves by saying, oh, you can't touch this, you can't touch that, you can't touch the wage bill, you can't touch the social grants, etc. When we grow the economy, we can even increase the social protection because the economy is growing. But we're in a death spiral right now, and that really worries me.
Now, that death spiral, we understand, is through bad policy. But now no party carries a majority. And one would imagine that common sense could be applied, much like what has happened with the budget. You guys swooped in to aid the ANC in passing a bill. Surely you can swoop in to help other parties get rid of some of these bad ideas or this inaction.
Oh no, we. So I mean, at a national level, first of all, and we're gonna have some meetings in the next 48 hours, right? And we're going to be very clear. I'm going to be clear that we cannot solve this problem by pussyfooting around and wanting to be popular with everybody.
And who's that going to gain traction with?
We are not money. Listen, Mike, I can only put my view and try and convince as many people as possible. But I've spoken to a political leader on the way here to say, sorry, guys, we have to take unpopular decisions. Whether it is around what Mteto Nyati was complaining about at ESCOM, where you pay all of these middlemen in the name of BEE, whatever. Like, let's take some tough decisions here and say we have to introduce some efficiency and speed into government and growing the economy. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Are you going to introduce the tough conversation around BEE?
It depends what tough conversation you're looking at. What I believe, Mike, and we've had this conversation lots of times, you and I, in this room. What I believe, Mike, is that we need to rescue BEE from cronyism. We need to rescue BEE from cronyism. There is nothing wrong in a country with the history that we have from helping people get to a level where they can compete. And I know it's tried, it's corny. If Siya Kolisi had not gone to the school that he went to, he would have never become Springbok captain. But he was given an opportunity. You and I agree, he's a hell of a talented guy. He's a great leader on the field and so on. Right? And that's what we need to do in the economic justice sense. It's not to give people an unfair advantage. But what ends up happening is that if I know somebody powerful who can jeopardize the system for me, I can get in under the radar of BEE. The people who complain the most about this thing, Mike, are black entrepreneurs. Because they don't get a chance.
Yeah, I mean, I've argued it strongly with you about BEE. And I'm not doing this because I'm trying to protect some kind of privilege. I just see it as a very bad economic thing. And we pay, there's a talk of 100 billion rand a year that we pay as a tax on the BEE system. Okay, there in itself, in a country constrained, that's money. I want to talk about the formalizing of informal businesses.
Yeah.
You know, it sort of seems to me to be falling into a similar category as the social grants. Nobody wants to do it because it's unpopular. But we do have burgeoning township economies.
Yeah.
We've had the perennial bad boy of the taxi industry, paying zero, you know, all of these businesses not in the tax net. And our tax net remains the same number of people. And let's understand that that same number of people is, you know, you go do work at a big corporate, and the majority of the employees, highly skilled, well contributing, are black. So we've just replaced white corporate taxpayers with black taxpayers, but the net hasn't grown.
No, it hasn't.
And do you plan to make any move towards that?
You know, Mike, I think what has been confused in this conversation about informal business and so on, people are confusing compliance with bylaws and health standards with formalization. There are instances where you need to let businesses stay informal, especially where they supplement family income. You know, my uncle, who was the first to go to university in our family, went because my grandfather sold sheep and maize and bags of maize to pay for his... now, you could call that... I don't want my grandfather or somebody who operates like that to register that thing. If they don't want to, if they make enough money to supplement their income and help the family survive, let them do it.
So what becomes the threshold?
However, anybody with an income of 500, and SARS, by the way, is able to surveil bank accounts now. With an income of 500,000 rand and above, you start taxing them. And you use the bank account because SARS can now surveil bank accounts. Let them stay, you know, informal, but you use the different thresholds and bank accounts are linked to ID numbers. Doesn't matter how many bank accounts you have. That information can now be aggregated. Yeah.
Another way of looking at that is one can make everybody formal, and then that'll reduce the load, especially down at the low level. Then it becomes a matter of managing that. But once you got people in the net.
The same guy was complaining about red tape. Eh? No, some people can handle red tape, but others can't.
No, well, yeah, and it's just a question of
Because it
how
costs
many
money.
meters of it, because there's a lot of red tape out there. And I'm saying, otherwise you start creating incentives that are split the business between 10 people. We never pay taxes, right? And SARS can go and check all those bank accounts. It'll never feature,
the
right?
day they catch you.
Yeah, well,
Your life is
who are they
over.
going to catch? But I'm saying, okay, so let's just head towards bigger issues. South Africa doesn't find itself operating in a vacuum.
Yeah.
The 30-year honeymoon is over for South Africa of telling the rest of the world how to behave while we can't keep the lights on.
Ended 10 years ago.
Yeah. Now South Africa finds itself in a hostile global environment. And what is your take of, in the hallowed tents of Parliament?
So my contribution in our discussions, Mike, is that we are in a world that is changing irrevocably because of developments in the US. I remind people all the time that we could be in the same position as Canada. We're not there yet. If this was a schoolyard, we're being insulted in the schoolyard while the Canadians and others are getting beaten up. So it can get worse, Mike. So I want us to contextualize South Africa's position in that sense. Here's my concern about South Africa, and that is we are too slow in shifting from an archaic, West versus the rest, a kind of thinking around diplomacy and strategic allies and so on than we should, right? And I was thrilled when the European Union came here and we signed a deal. We need to do more of that stuff. The time of saying we are against the West, long gone. We shouldn't be doing that stuff. The Chinese don't do it.
The Indians don't.
Indians don't do it. We shouldn't do it. It's stupid. Let's not engage in that. Let's work towards greater integration with existing trading partners, one, and secondly, building more partnerships with countries that we might have ignored before, because everybody in the world is doing that.
Yeah.
With a US that's fighting with everyone.
Now, there's been another global trend, which we haven't responded to, and that is that what has changed in the world is speed of execution.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned, we were talking off air about getting some of the bloat out of the system.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about national skills, CETAs, etc. A terrible waste of money. I think the only people it really helps are the newspapers, because they can carry editorials on Sunday about more and more money being stolen. I should refer that to Scopa. But at what point is South Africa going to speed this up? I mean, for example, in the beginning of this year, we saw the ANC being very speedy in putting together the Expropriation Act and NHI and passing and getting these through Parliament. So surely it's not a speed issue.
No. Listen, they took incredibly long with that legislation. Do you know that I was still at APSA and I've been gone out of APSA half a decade, when the expropriation conversation started, like 8 years in the making. That's too slow to do legislation. It is. We're incredibly slow in South Africa, Mike, even on those things. The NHI, the ANC decided to have an NHI in 2017, or was it 2012? It was 2012. It's 2025? You still haven't done it? You understand? So no, please, these are not people who move fast, Mike.
Yeah.
At all. And that's a problem.
Yes.
That is a fundamental problem, because one of South Africa's biggest weaknesses is opportunity cost, because we spend too much time talking, vacillating, analyzing, and so on, instead of getting on with it, right? And that's a strategic disadvantage that we have, because in other countries, 8 months, a year down the line, what they said they would do, they start doing.
It's implemented.
They start doing. That improves investor confidence, because we can trust these guys. When they say they're going to do something, they do it. And once they do it, the rules are clear. They don't change all the time. They apply it consistently. I can trust them. I can invest in them. That's one of the biggest failures of the ANC, Mike. It's one of the biggest failures of the ANC.
But it was really their operating procedure that delayed it all. It wasn't necessarily...
Oh, yeah. Mike, the speediest legislation, do you know which one it was? It was a General Laws Amendment Bill.
Right.
The one that killed the scorpions.
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy, did they move fast.
Right.
on that
Now,
one.
you mention how long some of these laws have taken to reach the government gazette. Now, some of them were promulgated in that previous era that we speak about, when South Africa was able to do anything they liked. They could run unemployment up to 50% and then lecture the US on how to run an economy. Those days are over, quite clearly, and I don't see them returning, and I don't think it's just a Donald Trump issue. Because
we shouldn't have lectured anyone in any case.
But we're good at that.
We should have just done what we need to do.
We're the land of Nelson Mandela, and we Rainbow Nation. But the point is that some of those laws that were put together in a previous era, do you think they are still fit for purpose?
Like which one?
Well, obviously the big one being, if you're going to pass an Expropriations Act, it's probably silly to go and argue that it's not an Expropriation Act when you called it an Expropriation Act. That will, basically, let's put it this way. If you got a call, I gave your number to some industrialist that said to you, Mr. Zibi, I believe you sit in Parliament. I want to make a multi-billion-dollar investment in South Africa. Can you assure me that nobody can take my property?
Yes, I can.
You cannot.
I can.
I bet you can't.
Okay. I can explain to you why I can.
Because you're going to tell me that there's a whole court process and a process and a process.
That's not what I'm going to tell you.
Yes.
That's what I'm going to tell you. The first thing is that we've had expropriation in South Africa for decades.
Yeah, but not with null compensation and not in the public interest.
No, sure. Actually,
in
in less than the public interest. Mike, I'm quite happy at another time to share with you the old legislation.
Right, so now
fall off your chair.
Right.
But let's talk about this one.
Call.
Let's talk about this one, right? Mike, there is a procedure that was missing in how expropriation is done. I worked in the mining industry. The biggest fight farmers have, apart from criminals, in the Lowveld and in the northwestern Limpopo, is with the mining industry, because they get kicked out of their farms. Because the government has licensed Mike Sham to dig minerals where they're farming cattle, and they've farmed for 30, 40 years. That's under the previous legislation. Could be done. All right? I worked there. Villages get moved entirely. There's even a procedure for relocating graves. So let's not kid ourselves and say it doesn't happen. It does. Farmers, the Concord is littered with cases by farmers against the Minister of Minerals in the mining industry because of expropriation of land. The only thing that has happened is that there is now a particular minister that is empowered to do this. One, it sets out a clear procedure for doing so, including instances where there may be nil compensation.
Okay, so let's go back.
And I'll tell you why. Mike, let us not look, and I'll tell you, not you, but there are people who approach this with a white guilt lens. Let me explain to you why, and I'll use crude language in my language. So the black people will understand, but it's necessary to make the point. One of the reasons in my village and surrounding areas people don't vote EFF is because the EFF says land should belong to the government. I've spoken to a couple of people. The one guy I spoke to, he said, Banganya, they would SH1T themselves. This is my ancestral land. If they think they're going to come and take it, they will have to go through me first. Yes. This is our land. We must be careful of presenting a scenario, which is what the people who often talk most often about this, to suggest that black people are not concerned about the same potential abuses of power, because that's what they do. Right? That's what they do. There are instances where there should be nil compensation. It's in Section 25 of the Constitution already. It's silly to suggest that what is in the Constitution cannot be amended. Why?
No, I'm with you.
Cannot be enacted. So the second and last, I know this is a long answer, last point, Mike. We've got something in South Africa called the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. That thing has tripped up presidents from Bakkie to Zuma. Right? And the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act says arbitrary actions, administrative actions, are unlawful and stand to be set aside by the court, right? And once a court has pronounced once, even on a procedure, that procedure is gone, right? And that's important because even if some official somewhere or a rogue minister may decide that instead of expropriating this land to build a road, I'm now giving it to my buddy, Mike, that would be the end.
Or let's finish our situation now. We've got this investor who's on the line with Mr. Zibi, and he says, I want to build a big plant in South Africa, and I'm going to employ 10,000 people, and it's going to be this how secure is A, this property that I want to build, C, the building that I'm building, C, the property, the intellectual property, and my business, right? Because I see that there's this thing called the Expropriation Act.
Yeah.
Right? And I am dead scared, surprisingly, because it's called the Expropriation Act, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm phoning you because Mike gave him your number and said, please tell me, is my investment in South Africa safe?
Mike, please give them my number. You know why?
Yes.
Because Mike, I actually do speak to these people.
Right. And what do you tell them?
So, no, hang on, Mike. So let me tell you what they ask.
Yes.
Right. So, and I'll mention 5 things without explaining them. The first thing they want to know is the GNU going to hold?
Right.
Right. So that's number 1. The second thing they ask about are those structural problems around the economy that I spoke about.
Right.
Is your transport? Which municipality can I be in? Because
water would be
right,
nice. Yeah.
Water would be nice, etc. So that's the second thing they ask about. The third thing they ask about is crime.
Right.
Because right. So we're now at number 3. The fourth thing they ask about is regulation.
Right.
The speed with which we provide licenses and this kind of thing. Right. The fifth thing they ask me about is getting the skills that they need for their business. 5, I spoke to a Norwegian fund 2 weeks ago. I speak to these people, Mike.
Yeah.
There is a level of fear-mongering.
Yes.
That is unhelpful.
I'm happy to promote that fear-mongering.
Don't, please.
No.
Mike,
I think we've got to lance the boil. We've got to face it.
I worked for a bank, and it's got an investment banking arm. I've spent a lot of time speaking to people who put money in this country.
Okay.
Believe me, they have bigger concerns than this act.
But now you haven't answered my question.
I've answered. I've
no,
told
you
them.
Haven't. You said that they're worried about everything else. I'm saying that I'm straightforward question, right? I want to build a plant in South Africa. I'm going to multi-billion-dollar plant in there. Is there any protection? Because I see that there's this thing that has been passed, and before I make this investment and build this plant, that I'm dead scared that some politician who might not be a nice guy like Songezo Zibi, but it may be our president Malema, who says that plant, it's actually in the public interest, that plant now belongs to, the government.
Come on, Julius is a teddy bear.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, Mike.
Right.
No, Mike. Let's carry on.
So, how do you answer the guy who says?
No, Mike, when I said I've answered it, that explanation I gave you about the protections in the law.
Yes.
They are real, right? Because I've worked with them, right? In the case of even the litigation that I was telling you about, where the courts are quite clear that unless certain conditions are met, you actually may not remove that farmer, as an example. One of the things you can't say, in fact, there's a case in the Western Cape, the ShopRite Holdings versus the Western Cape government. The Western Cape government is trying to expropriate land that belongs to ShopRite Holdings so that it can build a road, so that it can then expand housing. ShopRite is disagreeing. Alan Windy says, we really need this piece of land. Otherwise, we can't expand the city and urban planning and that kind of thing. The matter is in court, right? So what I'm trying to say is there are protections. You're not having, ShopRite downscaling because they've got a case against the Western Cape government. They're not, right? What we need to protect, Mike, in South Africa is the integrity of our judiciary.
Yeah.
Because without that, one of the biggest underminers of investment, Mike, is a case where politicians can ignore or overrule judges. That we must protect with every fiber of our being. Then this problem can be dealt with.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, when we speak to Songezo Zibi, there's hope. We've got a big battle on our hands with people that are living in the past and people that want to create a better future. And I certainly believe that Songezo Zibi is one of those people that want to create a better future. So I'd like to thank you, Songezo, for joining us today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you to Pace Car Rental, who sponsor this and keep us on the air, and to you that make sure that this content gets watched and people change and can be filled with information so that you can make the right choices. And from the State of the Nation, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe, and we'll see you again on the State of the Nation. Thank you very much for joining us.